Thank you. Everybody can hear me in the back okay? Cool. All right, so again, my name is Cameron Fordmeir, and I am the owner and operator of Awareness Consulting and Training. I do these trainings a lot for law enforcement. I sit on the crisis intervention team training, so I do their 40-hour training. I also do a lot of these for fire and EMS, and as well as like Hanford, P&L, if you guys are familiar with those. So I really like doing these a lot. Before we get into it, I'm going to kind of read the room real quick. How many of you, and you can just do a show of hands, you don't have to like start talking and yelling out a bunch of stuff. Show of hands, how many of you are employed by a private security company? Okay, and how many of you are employed by a city police department or sheriff's department? Okay, and how many of you that didn't raise your hand are others? Okay, and what is that? What? School district, okay. All right, and how many of you have a military background? Okay, so some of the stuff we talk about here when it comes to de-escalation, you're probably dealing with in a little bit, but that's what we're gonna cover is de-escalation, and that is a big deal in our field, a big deal in your guys' field. It has a lot to do with us as people and what we do, and so we'll cover that, and then we'll also cover kind of a intro into mental health for youth and what to look for, how to frame some conversations, how to make those supportive, those kind of things. So I'll give you a little bit of background by myself because you are a captive audience held hostage for 2 hours, so I might as well talk about myself while I'm up here, right? So again, Shelby said I've worked in behavioral health for over 21 years now, and that's been in a variety of settings. I kind of stumbled into mental health. I originally was going to school to be a physical therapist, and I needed a job to pay for insurance and school and a car and all those other kind of things, so I was thumbing through the paper. That's back when jobs were actually in the paper. You know, and you would look and circle them and circle a bunch and then call and do that. I don't even know what you do now, but probably check a website or something or an Indeed. So I'm looking through this thing and it's a security position. I'm like, I could do that. I can be, get a flashlight and, you know, just step up, hey, don't do that, right? I got that. So I show up to this job and it's kind of security, but it's not security, right? So they're like, how do you feel about working with sex offenders? And I'm like, well, what kind of security job is this? You know, like, what am I doing security over? And they're like, well, how about, you know, high-level offenders, arsonists, murderers and stuff? And I'm like, what's going on here, you know? And so they tell me that it is kind of security. It's 24/7 monitoring for dual diagnosis clients, so either chronically mentally ill, severe substance use disorder with some developmental disabilities. And so to put it bluntly, how many of you guys know about 1077 orders, competency restoration orders? Any correction backgrounds? Okay, so you might hear that a lot, the 1077. So these are individuals who have committed crimes, but they are incompetent to stand trial. They also don't understand court proceedings. So what do you do with somebody like that, right? Do you send them to Eastern State Hospital where they could potentially take advantage of people there, or do you send them to prison where they're going to be taken advantage? Well, I'll tell you what you do with them. You put them in a group home and monitor them 24/7 from some idiot 18-year-old right out of high school. And you're monitoring. So that was my crash course into mental health. And so I was taking psychology classes just because I had to take those prerequisites. And I was like, all right, this is a very entertaining job. I like this area. And I'm also terrible at math and science and biology and chemistry and everything else you would have needed to do to be a physical therapist. So I switched routes. And so I got a master's level of education in real world as I was going to school. And so after I got my bachelor's degree, went and worked on the psych hospital. And so did a lot of takedowns there, did a lot of stuff that was probably back in the heyday before we put so much emphasis on verbal de-escalation. We did a lot of physical de-escalation, right? So I worked on the psych hospital, did both kids and youth for a long time, switched over, and I was in my 20s, got my bachelor's degree done and over with, and so I switched to outpatient, did some case management, and back then our county is the one that did the crisis provider. So I worked as a crisis counselor and did case management full time. While I was getting my master's degree, because I was probably manic. We'll talk a little bit about that. And in my 20s, I'm just kidding, I'm not really. But I had a different energy level back then where I could do 2 full-time jobs and do master's programs. So I did that. After I got my master's program, I became a designated crisis responder. Back in the day, it used to be designated mental health professional, right? So that dates me a little bit. But so I did that up until the county no longer wanted to provide crisis services. And so the behavioral health agency that I was working at decided to take that on. So my two jobs became one, and that was kind of how I got into leadership. And so the last 8 years of my career have been in managing. And so I managed the crisis services for Benton and Franklin County. I managed jail mental health in Benton County Jail, the prosecutorial diversion program. Some of you guys know mental health court. That ring a bell, drug court. It's like the complement to that. It serves those who are found incompetent. And then I wrote and managed the True Blood Grant, which is where designated crisis responders pair up with law enforcement and they respond in tandem to behavioral health emergencies. And so I did that all the way up until August. And most recently, I switched over to Greater Columbia Behavioral Health, and I'm the regional administrator for the Recovery Navigator program. And so have you guys heard of the Blake bill, Blake decision? Made simple possession no longer crime. You had to do 3, so on and so on. But so they implemented field response teams, and so I am the regional administrator for all of those in our area, which is Kittitas, Yakima, Walla Walla, Columbia, Stoughton, Garfield, Benton, Franklin, and Whitman counties. And so I get to travel and do cool stuff like that. But in my other time, I get to do these, and I really like these trainings a lot. Get to come out here and talk to people, meet people, and kind of talk about important stuff that you're going to need in your day-to-day life, not just at work. So when we do talk about this, I want you to think about your own life. I want you to think about your kids. I want you to think about your significant others, so on and so on, because it applies across the board. And also board member for the Youth Suicide Prevention Coalition and Recovery Coalition in that. So disclaimer stuff. I do have a disclaimer. Last time I did one of these, I was up here and it was more stadium kind of seat, right? So everybody could see. I was up in front. It wasn't table set up like this. And it's probably about an hour and 45 into this presentation. And this female officer gets up and walks in front of me, and she's probably about right here. And she's going like this. So I'm trying not to get distracted, and I'm watching her do that, and I'm like, what's going on, right? So I'm continuing my presentation. And she's like, no. So I'm like, oh, what, lady, what's going on? Are we leading by example on what not to do? Like, what is going on here? And so finally she goes, your zipper's down. And I was like, oh. Like a fool, in front of everybody, right? And there's these 2 officers in the front row that I know. They both work for Pasco PD, and I'm like, you let me be up here for an hour and 45 minutes, and you didn't tell me anything. And they're laughing. They're like, it was a slow build. It went down slow. I'm like, that's better, you know? So you watched it go down the whole time and decided to tell me when I was all the way. All right, never mind. So anyway, back to the real disclaimer stuff. This presentation is for awareness and informational purposes only, okay? So it does not supersede any of your policies and procedures, so we'll do that. It is not a substitute for actual treatment, right? So if you are struggling yourself, coworkers, or the students that we're talking about, we want to get them in hooked up with services. This presentation, when we talk about specific modalities of treatment, I'm not endorsing any personally or telling you to either. It's more that, hey, if it's working and it is working out for the student or it's working for the population, that's all I really care about. And then I am a mental health professional, but I'm not your mental health professional. And what I mean by that is that confidentiality. So I like real stories. I like to bring up my own. I'd like you to bring up yours if it's applicable and you want to, but we'll keep names and stuff out of it because I can't guarantee the confidentiality of it. And again, everything that we talk about, make sure your governing bodies are on board. So if you have your own policy procedures at your agency that you're employed by, plus the school, check all of those, okay? So moving on to objectives, what do we want to accomplish today? We want to become familiar with principles and techniques that are going to allow you to recognize first, right? If we don't notice something is occurring, it's really hard to do something about it. So first we want to recognize what we're looking for, and then we want to find ways to reduce and manage any potential aggressive, violent, or any other type of perceived violence. We also want to provide effective, compassionate ways of dealing. How many of you guys work with somebody or know somebody that just irritates people by their mere presence? Okay. Yes, I'm sure you all do, right? Maybe they're in the room next to you. I don't know, no judgment, you know. But there's always that person that just comes across as not very compassionate even when they're trying to be, and it's like whether how they're standing or whatever they're doing that kind of senses that. So we want to be aware a lot of our nonverbals, and so we'll go through some of those as we proceed through the presentation. But also, how many of you guys have ever been assaulted on the job or involved in a physical altercation? Okay. So a lot of times fear kicks in, right? And it could be perceived. It doesn't have to be an actual act, right? And so ideally we'll talk about doing some mental conditioning and figuring out that fear element so that you're able to clearly respond rather than react, okay? So go through that and how do you control that mind-body stress feedback loop. So we have a few ground rules, though. We are going to talk about some touchy subjects or topic areas, but while we do that, we're going to speak with respect and compassion and empathy, okay? Does anybody know the difference between sympathy and empathy? Yes, sir.
Empathize with somebody by identifying how they feel. Empathy is like just kind of relating to the fact that you understand where they're coming from doesn't necessarily mean you agree with it.
Exactly, yep. Sympathy, I feel bad for them. Empathy, I can identify with how they're feeling, and I don't have to have those same experiences. There's a myth there that, well, you'll never know unless you experience it. It's like, well, I don't have to know about being religiously persecuted to know what persecution would feel like to flee a country, right? I can understand what that would feel like to somebody. So when we do that, we're also going to use people first language, and I'll give you some examples as we go through the presentation. A lot of times, we don't do this with medical conditions. We don't call people the cancers, right? We don't call them the heart attacks, but we sometimes do that with behavioral health, the bipolar disorders, the psychosis guys. We'll use language first. And so when we talk about people, we'll try to talk about the person first and then the diagnosis second. And so, again, be kind to yourself. Get up if some of this is triggering to you or that you don't like it or you're just bored and need to stretch your legs. These chairs don't look like 2-hour chairs to me. But if you got to get up, do your thing, no worries. And then personal stories are not required but encouraged. The parking lot, no, that is not for you to pick a fight with me in the parking lot after I piss you off saying something. This is to, if you bring up a topic area that requires a little bit more explanation or we're going to hit on it later on in the presentation, I'll just parking lot it. And then if it's something else that we need to talk about more, I'll get time after this to talk. All right, so getting started. When we are talking about preventing and diffusing aggressive behavior, okay, it starts with us. And I think a lot of times people forget that. We expect that somebody else is going to behave a certain way. And so when we're talking about diffusing and preventing, we have to start with conditioning ourselves mentally. Right? How many times have you guys expected something to go a certain way and it didn't go that way and you were pissed off? Right? Now think about on the opposite end of that as being a kid and not having a whole lot of control throughout your day-to-day stuff, right? So we have to condition ourselves mentally that we're already going to be in conflict. When we do these trainings for a lot of law enforcement, it's like, hey, are you used to rolling up on a scene and people liking you, happy to see you? Right? You would want to. That would be ideal. You're a police officer. You're coming to save the day. You're going to do your thing. People would be happy to see you. Most people aren't, right? And that really pisses people off after a while. It over and over kind of wears on you. Nobody's happy to see you. Everybody, you're the bad guy, so on and so on. So how do you condition yourself to actually have some realistic expectations in that, right? The other one is that we're going to understand our nonverbal communication. So 90% of communication is all nonverbal, right? I learned really quick working on the psych hospital that what I said was less important than how I said it, right? People remembered how I would make them feel versus the education that I would give them with my words, right? But they remembered how that felt to them. And also listen effectively. In our society, it's pretty rare to be listened to. Most people are just waiting for their turn to talk, right? So how are you listening effectively? And the other one we're talking about is communicating effectively, managing each stages of conflict. Sometimes people do go from 0 to 100, but usually there's a building stage in there. And if we don't interject in the right stage, we can escalate a situation. And so we'll talk about those. And then again, your spacing, how you approach individuals. So we'll talk about personal space and talk a little bit about reactionary distance. All right, so let's talk about mental conditioning. Those of you who are sports fans, this makes sense for sports, right? You see somebody on the batter's deck, they're waiting, they're timing pitches, they're looking. They're not actually up there taking practice swings, they're not actually up there doing it, but they're visualizing it. You check in the back for somebody who's boxing or MMA and they're shooting, they're doing, going over different holds. They're going to be kind of visualizing it as they go. We know this for law enforcement, fire, EMS, military, right? Everybody does some type of visualization or mental conditioning before you actually get into the real stuff. So there are several benefits for mental conditioning, and part of your brain is actually activated when you do this. How many of you guys went to college? How many of you guys played drinking games in college? This side's just more admitted, right? And they're like, we don't do that. It's recorded, guy. What are you trying to set us up? So even when you did like beer pong or quarters, right? If you would do so much better if you could visualize the arc on that tennis ball or the ping pong ball, right? Or the quarters, you would do so much better than if you were just like, yeah. It's going to go a lot better, right? So when we talk about silly stuff to serious stuff, mental conditioning is a big tool that we can use, because I hope that we're never doing active shooter practice with actual shooting, right? But hopefully you have that in your head that, hey, that's a possibility. The probability of it happening is low, but the possibility of it happening exists, so we should probably prepare for that, all the way down to just a fist fight, right? So anything that you could think of, we want to mentally condition ourselves for, because we don't want to be behind the 8 ball if that actually happens. We want to be able to use some of our skills that we've developed, or at least visualized. So one of those is that we can enhance new skills. If you're not an assertive person, this is a good way, or dealing with certain types of people or dealing with certain situations make you nervous or anxious. This is a great way that you can get that out and actually have some real practice and gain new skills that you didn't have. The opposite is true for bad skills, right? When I grew up, eye contact was like, what are you looking at? You got a problem? Right? Why are you looking at me? But that's how it was. So like on the psych hospital, probably not the best mentality to have, right? Like, why are you staring at me? Well, maybe they're psychotic. That's probably why they're staring at you, okay? But I would also laugh when somebody would insult me. They would say something, I'd be like, once again, not a good de-escalation technique to laugh at somebody who's telling you that you made them mad or that you're upset, right? So right away you can kind of curb those, learn to get rid of some, add some others that you're not. It's also a good way to control your stress level, okay? And I won't death by PowerPoint, you guys can read, but on the bottom there, why would mental conditioning reduce your chances of developing or worsening existing PTSD? Somebody, you're on camera. Why would mental conditioning reduce your chances of developing or making existing PTSD worse?
Because you're prepping yourself, you're getting within your psyche, so you're prepping yourself to be reactive to the situation, or I guess proactive to the situations that you encounter.
Yeah, and we can think about that with violence, right? If I expect to be punched in the face, or at least I know that's a possibility that could happen, it's going to be far less impactful than if I just got cold clocked and had no idea that it was coming, right? Same thing with driving a car. You think about that when I'm playing my favorite song of making my way downtown, walking, boom, and I get sideswiped, okay? I wasn't expecting that. I was in my jam. I was vibing. But if I had been and I could see it coming and I'm preparing and I'm going to turn away from it or brace for impact or whatever, that car crash is going to be so much less impactful if I can see it coming and I'm preparing, or I had the offhand chance that, hey, I could get in a wreck today. I already had that as I was driving. So remember that, because even from a mental standpoint, we're far more likely to succeed if we know a possibility exists and we can prepare for that. All right, so when we talked about those interventions, okay, when somebody is anxious, a lot of times we go to that quick fix solution of, hey, just do this or do that, right? We do that Dr. Phil. You flip a pancake on both sides, it's still flat. You do some real quick fix thing that doesn't really do anything. And instead, we could just be supportive with that, right? Hey, I notice you're pacing. Is there anything I can help you with? You need, blah, blah, blah. We just want to state the observation. I noticed this. What's next, right? I want a supportive response for that. When somebody's emotional confrontational, or when they are verbally aggressive, we want to be assertive. And then how many guys, there's some of you that are young, some of you that are older, how many guys remember the movie Police Academy? Remember Hooks? The small African-American female that was in that? And yeah, right? She was quiet. She had more of this submissive side, like, don't do that, just please. put that down? But then when she had to, she was like, don't move, dirtbag, and she would bust out her gun. She went from submissive to aggressive. There was no assertiveness in that communication, right? So assertiveness is right in the middle there. It's not kind of a pushover and being submissive, but it's not overly aggressive and I'll tell you what to do, kid, right? It's right in that middle there. It's very clear, very concise, hard to misconstrue. So when somebody's verbally aggressive with us, best course of action is just simply be assertive. Okay, state what your expectations are, state what we're going to do, what the potential consequences would be, and we don't add a whole lot of fluff to that or threats or anything else, right? And the other one with physical aggression, we are going to be defensive as possible. We don't want things to get hurt. We don't want bystanders to get hurt. Doing so many takedowns, I don't know how many times staff got hurt, patients got hurt, walls got broken, things got destroyed, right? So the overall goal would be to not ever get to that point. So that's worst case scenario. So with 5 methods of communication, you guys just had kind of your FERPA, policies, procedures, all that wonderful stuff. Reading and writing is far less important when we're talking about people. It's an important part of your job, right? You want to write good reports, you want to have good stuff that you're out there doing, and you want to have some type of documentation to back up what's going down. But when we're talking about people, far less important. Nobody cares when they're talking to you how well you read and how well you write, right? So when we're talking about people, we're going to be talking about these first 2. We want to pay attention to our nonverbals, and we want to pay attention to our listening. Our verbal skills are third in that, okay? So when we are talking about, our emphasis is going to be on the nonverbals and our listening skills. So nonverbal communication. We know this as being signals that are unconscious to most people, right? But you can see them. So they reflect what's going on behind the scenes. If you're shocked, you do one of these, right? If you're angry, frown. So your facial expressions are the first things people notice when we're talking about nonverbal communication, right? They reflect what you're saying. Well, some of these, people depend on words sometimes. Are you doing okay? And the person's like, yeah, I'm fine. It's like, well, you got your fist balled up and you're kind of coming towards me, so everything about the nonverbal says you're not, right? Or I'm kicking objects, knocking things off tables, but I'm telling you it's cool, I'm fine. It's like, well, I'm gonna go, if the two conflict, I'm going with nonverbal. So you and everybody else's safety, we're always gonna check out the nonverbals first. If they're telling you something and they don't match, we still go with the nonverbals in that, right? That's why we ask people to remove sunglasses, and a lot of times that's why FBI agents, police officers, so on and so on, wear sunglasses, because you can't see what's going on. That's why I used to like the mask. I could go back to snickering like I used to do, you know? That was the only thing I liked about the mask, is I could, and nobody would know I was doing it. Now I have to behave, nonverbals, okay? So just a quick list, when we talk about that, any conflicting stuff, we're always gonna go with whatever we see as being our predictor. So there are 3 levels of nonverbal communication. One of those is personal space, okay? And the other one is reactionary distance. They are 2 separate things. So when we talk about personal space, that's the area that I'm comfortable with you coming into, right? Reactionary distance is how much time I have to make sense of what's happening to appropriately defend myself if I need to. Okay, so they are 2 different things, and there are 2 different ranges on average, but it's always gonna be individualized, so we'll talk about those. Then eye communications, everybody has got a glance from a significant other, from a superior, from somebody that you knew what that meant without any words being said, right? So our eye communications are a huge one that we'll talk about, and then gestures, postures, and facial expressions. So let's talk about personal space, okay? Personal space is, when we talk about here in America, okay, we're gonna be talking on average for the US. Now this depends on your cultural difference though, right? Some cultures kiss you on the cheek when they meet you. Some bow, some shake your hand, right? Now we do this weird, I'm not supposed to touch your elbow kind of dance, do a little, I don't know what the rules are anymore. What are the rules? But cultural differences. So it is important to know your school district or with your school, what are the marginalized populations in that area? What are their backgrounds? What are the cultural, right? What are your own culture in your organization? So on and so on, right? What are and how do we do that with personal space? The other one's gonna be your upbringing, okay? If you were raised in a loving environment, touches, hugs, kisses, sitting on people's lap, meant safety, it meant you love, it wasn't bad at all, you have a different level of personal space than somebody who's been actively sexually, physically, emotionally abused, right? Has had trauma. Touch means something different. So they have a different level of personal space than what somebody who doesn't have that experience is. So we might as well assume that everybody that we come into contact, we're not going to treat them that way, right? But we might as well assume that everybody has some form of trauma in their past when we approach them, that we don't want to invade their personal space, okay? Because I'm not going to be listening to the words that you're using if I have to worry about defending myself or touching me. What you're saying isn't important, right? The habitat also, when you're at a doctor's office, there's a different level of personal space to where when the doctor's touching me outside of work, we have a problem, right? What are you doing? So habitat matters. Right? Are they in the school nurse's office or are they in the classroom? Are they outside in their play area? Is it at the gym? Where are we at, right? So habitat does matter, and same with environment, but age, okay? We think about, how many of you guys have kids? Do your kids have any concept of personal space, especially when they're young? No. My daughter grabs me by the face, and if I'm not looking at her this close, I couldn't possibly pay attention, right? And then she's treating me like a jungle gym. She's doing finishing moves on me. I'm like all over. I'm like, I'm just trying to watch a show, okay? So, but when my wife's dad does it, it's kind of weird. I have to tell Steve to leave. I say, Steve, you have to go. We talked about this, okay? So age matters for your personal space, right? Now we assume that kids have one level of personal space, adults have another, but sometimes there's going to be chronological age versus developmental age, okay? So are we talking to a 13-year-old kid that's really a 5-year-old kid? Are we talking to a 77-year-old male who's really a 13-year-old male, right? So what are we talking about when we talk about age? So cognitively, we got to pay attention to that and hopefully know what your disabilities are in that. And the other one is going to be gender, right? We're just talking about on average, okay? Going back to people first language, if I mess up and say something that people get offended with, I don't mean anything by it, but typically on average, female on female, closer personal space. Female on male, they want more space, right? For male on male, we want more space from typically dealing with males, where we're less intimidated dealing with females. So personal space is a little bit closer in that. So gender matters in that, but it also matters for what their pronouns are, right? We might as well just assume that is the gender role too. If they are assuming one gender versus another, we might as well assume that those cultural norms are still there too, okay? So when we're talking about personal space on average in America is about 3 feet to the front, okay? Where eye contact, all of that, if you get any more within 3 feet of that, I start feeling really uncomfortable, okay? But it's 1.5 to the side, and think about how you're sitting now, right? You sit in subways like that, movie theaters, but if you turned and faced each other from that distance, it'd be kind of weird and uncomfortable, right? So we make sense there. The reason that is our vital areas are protected, right? And that's why they teach a lot of 45-degree stance. When we're talking about de-escalation, if you're not in your 45-degree stance, you're already messing up because I have all of this to hit. My face, all the way down to my growing knees is exposed versus a simple move of my stance, right? I'm also in an athletic stance. If I need to bounce, if I need to defend myself, I can, whatever that is. So 1.5 to the side, and then 5 to the rear, okay? Because I can't see what's going on. I don't know about you guys, but when I'm in a grocery store or standing in line, I never like people right behind me, right? I always look, I'm like, oh, who's Taylor Swift dating now? Like I care, but when I look, I'm like, oh, they're buying that? I don't want my back turned to them, right? So I'm always gonna keep that here. I don't want anybody behind me whatsoever, okay? So if you can, please do not have people actively running behind you or circling around. Keep everybody in that distance, okay? But also think about that too when you're circling around students. So reactionary distance, okay? This is, like we talked about, the difference where my brain has to go through 3 processing times, right? I have to perceive something to be an issue, right? So there's a perception there. If I hear a loud pop, I have to perceive what that was, right? Then cognitively, I have to turn and make sense. Oh, that's a power line. That's not good, right? And then I have to, oh yeah, run now. And then I have my motor. So your brain goes through processing, perceptual, cognitive, and motor. If you are within 4 feet to do that, good luck, okay? How many guys watch UFC and boxing? So when they're in the clinch in boxing, how many of those shots are effectively blocked? They don't hurt all that much, right? But a lot of them are not blocked successfully. Same thing in the clinch, you're catching elbows. In MMA, you're getting kidney shots. They're hitting those body shots. Not a lot of those are effective. Some of them are, but you get in the right spot, get a liver kick, that's going to send you down. But they're hard to block even for people who do this for a living, right? That's what they do. They get up and they train, they do that, and within that, they still have a hard time diverting those. So it's safe to say that any of us, from professional fighters all the way down to students, 4 feet is the minimum that you want to be able to successfully defend yourself or block something, okay? So when we are talking about eye communications, there's a general rule for eye communications because, like I said, sustained eye contact is either intimidating or it's aggressive, right? Like I said, what are you staring at? Why are you looking at me? It's also why they teach when we do public speaking like this, you're supposed to scan the room, right? Because if I just did 100% contact while I was talking to somebody, it's kind of weird and creepy, right? You may be comfortable with it. I'm not, and I'm the one doing it to you, right? So 100% eye communication is not comfortable at all, and it never will be, okay? I don't care what date night says. Okay, so proper communication for eyes, general rule is when I am speaking to someone else, it is 60 to 70% of the time I maintain eye contact with them. You can break that down with a simple look at the ground, your watch, over the head, whatever you do, it's just a break, but it's not that sustained 100% eye contact, right? But when somebody's talking to us, we want to look like we're paying attention. We're invested in what they have to say. So we want to maintain eye contact 90% of that time in there. So when we are speaking to them, 60, 70, when they are speaking to us, 90%, okay? But with once again, 100% is usually either threatening, intimidating, or creepy. So eye communications, why is pupil size important to you in your job? What was that? Fear, okay, that's a good one. Why else? What are the obvious ones? Yep, okay. What's also another possibility besides fear and drugs and alcohol? What was that?
Just like sleep, someone's just super tired, something like that.
Yeah, you got a microphone and you waited. You were like, all right, fine. Yes, and the other one, it could be his head injury, right? Okay, did they have a TBI in the past and that doesn't reflect well on the light, or do they have an active concussion, so on and so on, okay? So same reason why you pull people to the sidelines and those docs are checking their eyes, making sure, okay? So pupil size matters because if somebody has a head injury, good luck de-escalating them sometimes, right? If they're under the influence of drugs and alcohol, good luck, okay? If they're sleep deprived or they're scared, good luck, right? So pupil size does matter when we're looking those. Sizing up is a dead giveaway, right? And everybody has probably been sized up either as a piece of meat or they've been sized up to fight, right? And neither one is good. You know what that looks like, okay? The other one is directed or uninterrupted. What would darting, jerking, looking around, if I'm doing this, okay, I'm either tweaking, I'm on something.
Looking for witnesses.
Looking for witnesses, okay. What was that? Yes, exactly. I'm looking at, for whatever reason, this situation, I'm not digging and I'm looking for my out. Where's my escape route? What do I have? Same thing for target glance. If I'm looking at your gun on your holster, it's probably safe to say I'm not, is that a Glock or a shield? Is that a Smith & Wesson? What is that? I'm thinking about grabbing it, right? Same thing with a pencil or something. So target glance, especially for uneducated, and we think about that in sports, like a bounce pass, if I look here, you can steal that, which is why I learned eventually to look here and pass there, right? Same thing with fighting. I look low to kick high, so on and so on. But most people in the times of rage or times of anger aren't really having that moment of clarity. So it's safe to say if I'm looking at that mug, I'm going to pick that up and throw it, okay? And then widening, target glance, so on and so on. So interpret eye communications, which sometimes, like these glasses are kind of changing based on light, and they also filter blue light, right? So usually I'll just take these off when I'm talking to somebody because then there is no constant stare. You don't know, you can actually look at my eyes and see it. And so that's why I would recommend that you ask either students to take off their sunglasses, or if you're wearing them, take them off too. So gestures, postures, facial expressions, right? Why we look at these is because they all look different depending on what stage, okay? So all the way from head, shoulders, facial colors, arms, legs, etc. If I'm depressed or I'm anxious, I'm probably not gonna be here, right? Versus if I'm trying to intimidate somebody, I'm gonna be up here like, what up? What's your problem, right? But also, are you in any danger when I'm doing this? When I'm looking so big and bad and trying tough, right? To my knowledge, nobody fights like this. Yeah. Like, what do you do in that? So we don't want to misinterpret, right, what we're dealing with here, because that looks different than if I roll my shoulders forward and I get into a stance and I'm ready to go. That looks different than the anxious person versus the verbally aggressive person to now I have to worry about my physical safety, right? So we always want to respond in that, which some people have a hard time with because they don't like being yelled at. And being yelled at makes them feel uncomfortable. So if you're one of those people, whether you grow up that way or whether you just don't like it, period, we run the risk of being like, you're not going to talk to me like that. I'll tell you. And now we've escalated the situation, right? So we always want to be cool, calm, and collective during any type of verbal altercation because it's not physical danger. And I don't mean that your safety is not important or that it's not called into question, but it looks different. If you're just being yelled at or somebody's being mouthy, you're not in any physical danger until those signs change. We're still going to keep our space so we have time to react, but we're looking at the stance, we're looking at how their body's leaning, we're looking at legs, stance, shoulders, all of that. Breathing is another one. Okay, I'm fine. It's like, you're not fine. Okay. Questions so far? All right. So conflict, okay? Think about this in your personal life. Two reasons and two major reasons, okay, why conflict exists. One of those is unmet expectations, okay? Let's talk about anniversary time. I expected my anniversary to go a certain way. Fill in the blanks however you want to, right? Nice communication, some candlelight dinner, whatever that is. And my partner forgot about the anniversary in the first place, right? Am I probably going to be very happy? No, okay? So we talk about this with products. If I purchase a product, I expect it to work a certain way. It's not working the way, I'm going to be pissed, especially when I try to return that product to the store and they tell me, nah, you got to go through corporate. All right, so I'm really pissed now. I had all these expectations, right? So we think about that from simple things like relationships, so on and so on. But this goes from big things to small things. The problem with this is that you don't control somebody else's expectations. You control yours, okay? So what do you expect every day coming to work, okay? Sometimes we don't even get there and our day's already blown up. All right, I got to pay this for gas prices. This is some BS. I got cut off. This happened, right? I had to pull in and use the bathroom before. I don't know what that was about. The breakfast burrito, something. My day's already not going well. Good luck trying to de-escalate when you've already had all that baggage coming in and now you're expecting to be at your tip-top shape to make sure that you're taking care of everybody's safety and so on, right? So first and foremost, you're not going to control somebody else's expectations, but you do control yours. Okay, so what are your expectations for your job? What are your expectations of your coworkers? What are your expectations of students, people, families, so on and so on, okay? If you do not have realistic expectations, or your expectations don't match up with what's gonna happen, you're gonna be pissed off. And this goes for both ways for the kids too, right? So for your own family, for your own friends, your own environment, it's always good to know what is the expectation. Are they even realistic, right? Can we do something about this and can we help or can we hinder? Okay. The other one is going to be related to past experiences. And this is where you hear all cops are this way, right? All these people are this way. All this population is this way. You ask, how many times have you actually interacted with that population? They're like, once. Okay, so they're all like that, right? But it's based on my past experience. I had this experience with this person, so therefore I globalize that to everybody. So you're dealing with two things when we're talking about kids and people in general. When they're already pissed off and they're upset, they've either, one, had an expectation that was not met, or two, you remind them of somebody that they already don't like, okay? And neither one of these things do we need to take personal. Okay. We're professionals, we're on this side of the table, we should have our expectations in check, and we should also not take offense to somebody else. That is our opportunity to prove them wrong. That is our opportunity to see not all of these populations behave that way, because I am a high-functioning adult who's in control of my emotions, right? I'm in control of my verbal, nonverbal, so on and so on. So when we're talking about conflict, keep those in mind, okay? What is your expectations? What is the expectation of the person I'm dealing with? What is their past experience? One of mine, okay? So there are three stages of those conflicts. We talked about this: anxiety, emotional confrontation, and physical violence, okay? Now that can go all the way up to each one of these. When I'm anxious, what is my expectation? Okay? When I'm verbally aggressive, what's my expectation? Do I expect you to punk out and then do what I say because I showed you how big and bad and tough I was? Or are you going to put me in my place and I found out who's my mark? Okay, and then I'll get good boundaries with that individual, but I'll go test this person over here, right? So each one of these stages, you're going to have somewhat of expectations, you're going to have somewhat of past experiences. So anxiety. I'm not going to death by PowerPoint you. You guys know what anxiety looks like, okay? Same thing with triggers. Triggers are anything that could potentially set somebody up for feeling anxious. Now that makes no sense to us because it's individualized to the person. It could be a change in the temperature of the room. It doesn't have to make sense, right? Perception is reality. If somebody feels anxious, you're going to waste your time talking them out of why they shouldn't feel anxious. It doesn't change the fact that they feel anxious. It doesn't change the fact that they were triggered, right? So when we try to get in these reality-based conversations, this does not equal this. That doesn't change the fact that they're still feeling anxious, okay? So I don't want you to get trying to get too much into reality testing or testing triggers for realities or whatever that is. It's simply put, anxiety is a noticeable change in behavior. Let's just go with that one, okay? So if you notice in yourself a change in your behavior, you notice in your coworkers, you notice in a child or a youth, adolescent, a change in their behavior typically means something happened, that anxiety, right? Easy ones are kind of like the stuttering, or they're moving around a lot or kind of fidgeting. We know a lot of them, right? But sometimes they go on different perspectives. Like my anxiety is completely different than what my wife's is. My anxiety propels me to do things and get it done in a timely manner because I hate the way it makes me feel. I get racing thoughts, I get all this stuff, it starts to consume me, I perseverate. The only way to get that done is just to get the job done, and then I feel okay. My wife says the exact opposite. It's overwhelming. Where do I start? There's all of these things and all of this stuff, and if I do this and this happens, there's a cascade effect, and nothing gets done, right? So we're on polar opposites of that. And so I know that expectation-wise, her anxiety is gonna not propel her to succeed, where mine has a little bit better of an option because I hate the way that makes me feel, so I get it done. Which is probably why I do majority, I'm just kidding. I don't do majority of the work. You're like, this guy's a jerk, dude. I tell her that all the time. I'll just get it done with my anxiety. So how do we manage somebody's anxiety, okay? Well, for one, we use that proper space, okay? If we're talking to them and they're nervous, and I'm like, well, are you feeling nervous? Are you feeling uncomfortable? Yeah, it's maybe a little bit to do with you're so close to me. I can smell your coffee breath, right? Proper space, okay? So what are we doing, and are we giving somebody proper space? That also has to do with exits too, okay? If we're not holding somebody to a spot and we're not allowing them to leave, if we're cornering them, meaning that I'm preventing you from getting to that door just simply based on where I'm standing in the room, proper space matters for that too. So does everybody have visualization of what the exits are so I can, at least if I have to run, I can, right? So proper space, supportive eye communications, okay? And these can be just nods. If somebody's telling you something that's a little bit shocking, you can give that to them. I prefer not to. When I'm doing therapy, when I'm doing anything, and this is an individualized thing, so I'm not telling you to follow what I do, I prefer this because I don't want to give somebody the reaction. So if they're telling me something sucked, I want to look like just like you're looking right now, straight-faced. Just want to hear it, right? I want to be as stoic as possible, okay? Because if I give them something, right, they can run with that. Oh, this makes that person smile, or this makes this person uncomfortable, or that makes them shocked, right? So depending on the situation, you're giving them kind of ammo to do that, where I prefer to be as neutral as possible, okay? Try listening to a kid tell you that they use their guinea pig as a pincushion and then put them in the microwave and not respond. That's pretty hard. So proper eye communications, supportive facial expressions, empathic listening, okay? When we talk about empathic listening, we'll talk a little bit more in here. But there was when I was in my master's program, we did this whole fishbowl exercise where all of the professors, all of the students sat around, and one person was a therapist, one person was the patient, right? And you had to draw what therapeutic technique was using. Did you get RABT, CBT, DBT, whatever you got, right? One of those fun acronyms. Well, the one I got was shut up and listen. It's like, how appropriate. Okay, so I got shut up and listen, and I'm sitting here, I'm talking to this person in my class, and they're telling me about their dad. And I'm like, connected the dots because I've heard this story in the past and so on and so on. So I think I'm really smart. I've just saved this person, millions of dollars worth of therapy just in their master's program. Now I'm going to tell them what it is, and I got this. Everybody's going to think I'm a genius. Guess what I stopped doing? Yeah. I didn't shut up and listen. I stopped listening, right? So sometimes you may have really good things to say. You may have this, really cathartic, really great response to somebody's issue. But other times, most people know what they should and shouldn't do. And if you just give them a platform to just validate and affirm what they're saying, that is de-escalation in itself. If I feel like I have the platform to just tell you something and you can go, I hear you, okay? That is more de-escalating than any other words of wisdom could be, okay? And think about that. How many of you guys been in a situation where somebody is just going in on you and you don't give them nothing back? You're cool as a fan, cool as a cucumber, whatever we want to say. Do they eventually stop? Yeah, they do. Eventually when they realize they're the only fool yelling, right? And you're the one that's cool and calm, typically people will calm down in a sense. But the minute that you give them a reason, the minute you go, don't you talk to me like that, then it goes, right? So again, when we're talking about empathic listening, listen for the intent, listen for the meaning, listen behind what somebody's saying versus what to answer or what to respond to. All right, so there are 5 levels of listening, okay? Ignoring the person is one, okay? Pretending to listen. How many of you guys are ever been in a leadership role? Okay. This was my go-to. I used to have to stop doing this because people caught on to it. I'd be typing and listening. Yep. Oh, sorry, that happened. Send, right? And I retained nothing of what they were saying, but I tried my best. So pretending to listen, eventually people will pick up on that, right? You can probably do some verbal cues. It's like, I get you, but eventually. Then there's selective listening, right? I'm like, you said you're going to make me a sandwich? And they're like, no, I called you a dumb. And you're like, oh. But do you have a sandwich? Okay. So selective listening, we know that one, right? Then there's attentive listening, which most of us do, where we pay attention like you're doing right now. You're all attentively listening to me, okay? Which is good, but empathic listening being the most important one because we do want to listen what it's like to say the things that that person is saying, okay? Can we pick up on more important things that they're saying rather than just their words? So we're listening behind in that meaning, okay? What does it feel like to say the things that they're saying? So again, empathic listening. How many of you guys are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay? The top of the pyramid is self-actualization, and most people never get there. Okay, it's really hard to be self-aware of what you think, what you feel, being in control of your actions. That is a lot of work, and that's like day-to-day work, right? How many seconds are in a day? Well, if you're self-actualized, you better be all of those seconds, right? Because what you do matters. But most people, next to physical survival, shelter, food, all those kind of things, most people want to be understood, validated, affirmed, and appreciated, okay? How many people are in relationships currently? Okay. Now, we see this all the time, and I'll get stereotypical, so nobody throw any lemons or, tomatoes or anything at me. But stereotypically, men are fixers, right? So when our partner is saying, this is bad, right? You want to say, well, just do this. And they're like, you're not listening to me. And I'm like, no, I did. You said this problem. I presented this solution, therefore no more problem. And they're like, no, you're not hearing me. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I was using that active listening that Cameron was talking about, and I heard you had the problem, right? And then the whole situation blows up. Well, most people know what they should and shouldn't do, right? This would drive me crazy when I'm doing an evaluation and somebody in the ED, and the nurse comes in and like, hey, have you ever tried to not use meth? And it's like, what is the person supposed to go, you can do that? I can stop using meth at any time and I have no more problems? Wow, nurse, thanks. Right? Most people know they can do that, but there are reasons probably why that person is using, right? There are other reasons why that would be a thing, not that they could just stop. So most people know if I have a problem, I could just do this and there wouldn't be a problem. But that's not the point, right? Most people want to be heard. They want to be understood. They want to be validated. All of those things, right? So fellas, if you take anything from this, do that at home and your relationship will be so much better. Trust me, okay? All right, if anything, take that. So supportive verbal communications. Nobody threw anything, so that's good. Okay, maintain a calm and reassuring voice. That is hard for some of us to do, okay? How many of you guys know a yeller when they talk? I'm like, yeah, it's you. There's a reason why Samuel Jackson does not do crisis work, because he's always yelling and he's always saying mother something, in there, okay? So when we are talking to people, it's really hard to be calm, soothing, de-escalating when you are speaking in a high volume or screeching, yelling, whatever that may be, right? So for our supportive verbal communication skills, we're always going to try to be in that calm, reassuring tone, okay? And think about this from when you were younger. Were you guys afraid of the mouthy person who was always telling you how big and bad they were? No, right? That's a show. If I gotta tell you how tough I am or tell you what my skill set is, it's probably a little bit of, I'll pull that card, right? Let's take our chances. Versus the person who's calm, cool, collective with whatever situation it is, whether it pops off, if it doesn't run. That's the person that I want to be with. That's the person who I want to be friends with. That's the person who I want on my team, because whatever the situation happens, they're going to remain calm and cool and collective, right? So that is de-escalating in itself. Having that person be you or be around you in itself is like, okay, this person knows what's up, so I'm not going to test too much in that, okay? I have evaluated thousands of people, detained hundreds of people. They were either going to jail on a diversion or they're going to the psych hospital or secure detox facility, right? So most of my interactions clinically are negative in nature. But probably similar to here, I run into people all the time at Yokes, at Fairchild Cinemas, at Walmart, name it, the fair. I'm running into people who I've evaluated, right? And I've yet to be stabbed, shot, spit on, because I treated everybody with respect. So you can still have negative interactions, and as long as you treat somebody with respect, it's gonna go a long way if you explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, even with a negative end result. If you treated that person with respect during the process, that's gonna go a long way. So if you are having negative interactions, which you will, as long as you treat them with respect, that will go a long way for that rapport, that'll go a long way for your reputation, whatever that is, right? So again, paralanguage, volume of speech, tone of speech, rate of speech, this is all important in person, but very important over the phone. How many of you guys have contact over the phone with family, friends, whatever that may be? Not in your personal life, but like at school, okay? So this is very important. If I can't see you, and I can only judge how fast you're talking, your tone, right? What you're emphasizing. I'm gonna pick up on different things, right? How many of you guys have wanted to go through the phone and snatch that AT&T person up by the neck, right? Just based on the tone they were talking to you in, right? So it's important in person, but it's very much important when I can't see any of that stuff, okay? And then again, always introduce yourself. It's been so weird for me to say when people are like, what's the problem here? Right? Or they come in with that type of attitude versus, hey, I'm so-and-so, here's what I do here, and here's how I'd like to set up this interaction, right? That goes a long way for de-escalating somebody simply right then and there, that you've told them who you are, what you do here, and what your goal is. It's a lot easier than being like, what's the deal? What's the problem? Right? And like, who are you? Why are you here? Why are you talking to me? Okay, what authority do you have? Okay, the other one that I don't like is you. Okay, when I say you, it means you did something, right? Your account, your personality, your issues, okay? First, let's talk about personality. Let's talk about a past due account. Let's talk about cars, right? If I say your car, you're this, you're that, there's some ownership to that, okay? So if you can take and just simply eliminate you, there's a lot less provoking that goes along. Same thing with why, okay? So if I asked, why are you wearing that hat? Sir, why are you wearing that hat? How did that make you feel? You're like, none of your business, fool. What are you talking? Why are you even talking to me, okay? Exactly. Why are you asking? Like, what is, okay? Usually it has a negative connotation versus I say, what about that hat do you like, right? Or how do you like wearing that? It's a more descriptive thing. Even just a simple if I said how, why, okay? versus or what and why. If you separate some of those out and don't use you and why, a lot of those are de-escalating just by the fact that I'm seeking information versus you need to justify why you're doing what you're doing, okay? So when we're talking about verbal communication, especially threats, okay, this is always one of those where I would get my staff come and be like, oh, they said they're gonna blow this place up. Okay, did you ask if that's how they felt? Or they have a bomb on them, they're going to do it? Like, there's more things to discuss here with that implied threat than just taking it at what it is, right? I've heard people say, I just don't want to wake up in the morning. Okay, well, are you describing how you feel, or are you going to do something to ensure the fact that you don't wake up in the morning? Because they're two different things, right? You hear people, oh, I just get hit by a bus, I just want to get run over. It's like, are you going to jump out in front of traffic and get hit, or are you just describing how you feel, right? So any type of threat, whatever that is, we want them to repeat, clarify. We want to add some more stuff to that. Is their plan, intent, is there means in what they're talking about, or are they just describing, in lack of a better way, how they feel, okay? So we always want to ask open-ended questions. You guys know what closed-ended questions are. It's just very yes, no, okay, yes sir, no sir type things, okay? But open-ended questions allow somebody some explanation. They can tell you a little bit of backstory, okay? This is always a good one for me because you can do it 5 minutes ago. It is always easy to isolate the person from the problem. And what I mean by that, if somebody's telling you people, and you can say, that's fine, and I'm sorry you had those interactions with everybody else, but right now, I want to deal with this issue. And right now, here's my goal, right? That happened 30 years ago. That happened 5 minutes ago. I'm here now dealing with this issue, and here's what I would like the end result to be. So you can isolate whether it happened, like I said, 5 minutes to 3 years ago, 30 years ago. We isolate problems from people and talk about what we're doing in the now here, okay? So same thing with anger. And if you can, you guys, those of you that have kids, how many times is just saying stop doing that effective? Exactly, doing what? What you're just doing. Why? And you, right? Versus using their name, and they're like, oh, who knows me? Who knows my full name, right? So sometimes if you know a student's name or you know it, just simply addressing them by that is de-escalating because they're like, okay, somebody at least knows enough to invest in knowing who I am and my name versus, hey, you, stop doing that, whatever it is, right? So emotional confrontation, again, I don't want to get too much into the triggers because anything is triggering. That's a debate we'll lose every single time, okay? But why is it known as the testing stage? And think about it from an animal kind of point of view, right? If a cat hisses, what is that telling you? Yeah, I'm giving you whatever's going on I don't like and you need to stop that. A dog growls, right? So on and so on. So we get it from that kind of perspective. But when a cat fights, and when a dog fights, do they make those same noises or are they just different types of noises, right? So testing stage is very much that with people. I am going to say whatever I need to say to invoke a reaction out of you, okay? And based on your reaction is where I take the next steps, okay? Like I said, who's my mark? Who can I punk out? Who's going to put me in my place and establish some boundaries? That is all what we're doing with verbal aggression there, okay? Emotional confrontation, verbal aggression, same thing, but it's the testing stage for that very reason, okay? So when we talk about are you getting tested, that's what I meant. Verbally, you're not in any physical danger. Yelling and screaming is not an uncomfortable thing for me. I've seen it be where it just destroys other coworkers. They just do not like it. It hurts them to the core. They do not appreciate it. They feel violated, all these other things, right? So for you being in that situation, we have to distinguish real danger from uncomfortability, okay? And how we judge real danger is we're looking, like I said, verbal cues. We're looking at their nonverbals. Are they balling up their hands? Okay, are they rolling their shoulders over? Are they getting into an athletic stance? What are they doing? So recognizing emotional control, okay, usually this right here, when I tell you how mad I am and you can see and is different than when I flex my jaw, preparing for a punch. That looks different than this does, right? So even we talk about that from shoulders to here, we all know that the difference in here. So that's what really, like I said, we're not going to death by PowerPoint you, but where we want to look at emotional confrontation, are shoulders square here or are they rolled here, bladed, right? Are my hands bladed here or are they folded in? We want to look at the difference. Okay, so there are 3 stages in that initial one. We want to remember that that individual is simply testing us, okay? And what we can do in that is we can allow them an opportunity to vent, okay? Whether we pull them and isolate them and allow them to do that in private, because maybe what they're doing is getting all of that other peer excitement around them, to where if we remove that stimulus, allow them a place to vent in private, that can be de-escalation, right? And if we can't, then we allow them to vent then and there. But we use our supportive stance, okay? When we talk about an assertive stance, that is where we're gonna start taking examples. You are doing A, okay? That is unacceptable for whatever reason. I need you to do B, okay? If you don't do B, C will happen, okay? That is kind of how we're gonna set that up on taking an assertive stance. You know exactly, because I told you the action that I'm doing. It's not okay to flip a desk, right? I'm gonna need you to walk out this room, okay? And here's what the consequences will be. If you do not walk out of the room, there will be another set of consequences, okay? But please, when you do set that up, you better pull that card, you better do it. Do not set expectations or consequences for something that you, 1, do not have the power or ability to do, or 2, you actually have no intention on doing anyway, okay? So if you are gonna do that, when we use that assertive stance, all of those things need to be present. You better have the power to do what you're saying you're gonna do, and you better actually have the follow through to do it, okay? Otherwise, we just blew it up, and it's kind of like the old DV thing where domestic violence, you hit me again, I'll leave you. You do it again and I don't leave you, okay? It's not okay, but I've just said that there is no consequence for that, right? There's no more teeth to that. So switching gears now, we talked about a lot of anxiety, meeting that with supportiveness. We talked about emotional confrontational, using that with assertive communication. And we talked about physical, of trying to look at the difference on are we in physical danger and being defensive. We're going to switch gears a little bit to talk about what you're noticing in your students' mental health. What are the signs and symptoms, how to recognize that, what to do with that. Okay, so when we talk about a mental disorder, okay, we all have traits of something. Okay? Everybody in this room has had a suicidal thought in their life. Everybody in this room has been depressed, anxious, or worse, right? Everybody has something. We all have traits of something. In order for it to be a diagnosable disorder, okay, from a clinician point of view, there has to be set criteria from the DSM, okay, and you have to be a qualified person to do that. But when we talk about kind of layman's terms and we talk about kids, okay, if their ability to work or go to school is affected, okay? If their ability to carry out their daily activities, whether that's grooming or just getting to class on time or completing their work, going to extracurricular activities, okay? Or they cannot engage in satisfying relationships, meaning that it's always everybody else's problem, right? Every time I have a problem with somebody, but it's always them. So if your ability as an adult or a kid, your ability to work, your ability to take care of your responsibilities, and your ability to maintain satisfying and meaningful relationships is affected, it's safe to say that that can be a disorder, okay? So that's how we can kind of just draw the line as a simple way of thinking about that, that if a student has these 3 things, it's safe to say they may have a disorder or something's going on, okay? So when we talk about people first language, okay, words do matter, especially more now than ever. I grew up in the 80s. That was not a thing. Try watching, any of you guys ever watch Monster Squad? I'm going through all these movies. But like, they're dropping first 5 minutes of that show. You're like, oh, you couldn't say that. This is PG-13? What? Right? So language does matter, and it matters now more than ever. But when we talk about people, we don't want to talk about their illness first, right? So we can say, you would say the neighbor who's living with schizophrenia, not your schizophrenic neighbor, right? So especially when we're talking about students and students' families or to their face, and you don't know who's going through what themselves. You don't know whose kids at home, cousin, aunt, uncle is going through this, right? So it's just safe to say, you talk about this a certain way so we're not offending anybody, and you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. So we just talk like this in general. Same thing with suicide. We don't say commit suicide. And why would we not say commit suicide? It's been in our vocabulary forever. What do you commit? Crime. What else do you commit? Think about it from a church. Sin, right? And that's where it came from. It used to be a punishable by law. It was a crime, and you used to go to hell. And you may still do. Who knows, right? But that's where it came from. That's where commit suicide came from. So it has a negative connotation to that you're either one, a criminal, or you could go to hell. So when we're talking about things, and especially people who have died by suicide, we just say that. They died by suicide, okay? Especially when we're saying unsuccessful versus successful suicide attempt. It's like, well, what are we talking about when we define success? Like, what are we saying, right? And if you're unsuccessful, does that mean you're a failure at even doing that? So once again, but these are the connotations, right? So I'm not trying to make too much light of that, but your words matter in how you say that, right? So it's just safe to say that if we're talking about suicide, we say suicide. If we're somebody that died by suicide, we just say that, okay? So this gram here, how many mathematicians do we have? Any statistics, guys? Or gals? Or they? Or them? Okay? So when we're talking about mental disorders here in the United States, majority of the people who seek treatment are seeking them for anxiety. But why is that? Why would the most things that you notice in your schools be anxiety? It's kind of easy to see though, right? I mean, you can see when somebody's anxious. Sometimes you can feel it, okay? But it's also more socially acceptable to be anxious than it is to hear voices, right? Or be in a manic episode, right? So more people will seek out because they're common, they're easily identifiable, okay? And there's less stigma attached to them, okay? So majority of the people who are seeking services, but when we talk about anxiety, we're gonna also include depression in that, okay? The reason why we're gonna lump these two together is because they frequently co-occur and you can't tease out the symptoms. If I'm restless, you can't tell me, well, that's anxious restlessness, this is depressed restlessness. They're the same thing, it's restlessness, right? You can't say, well, I'm having racing thoughts. No, that's anxiety racing thoughts. This is depression racing thoughts. It's the same symptom. So for depression and anxiety, their symptoms co-occur and they also co-together. If it's safe to say, were you so anxious that you started affecting your life to where you started becoming sad about it? Or were you so sad that you stopped performing well and you started getting anxious over it? It's chicken or the egg, right? They frequently co-occur. But why does this then not add up? For all of these, why does it come down here at 9.6? For our officers, this could be crime related too, right? You would say, why are all of these crimes, okay? But they frequently co-occur with others, right? So just because this doesn't add up mathematically, that's because somebody could have schizophrenia and be anxious. Somebody could have bipolar disorder and be anxious, so on and so on. So mental disorders typically lead to other mental disorders, okay? So it's safe to say, like when I'm doing my assessments on people, it's very rarely that somebody just has one issue, right? Because that one issue caused other issues that caused other issues that caused other issues, okay? So comorbidity is the fancy word for saying you probably have more than one, okay? So that's why that is. But why, like I said, we're gonna lump these together, okay? And remember, your goal isn't to diagnose. You're not diagnosing little Jimmy and Johnny and Jane. Your goal is to check out what are the signs and symptoms that we're worried about. What are we reporting? How are we reporting this, okay? How are we gonna formulate a sentence to them? What are we talking about? So it's less important to diagnose versus more important to understand what those signs and symptoms are, okay? So if we're getting technical about this, major depressive disorder, we all get sad. People have divorces. People lose loved ones, right? People have failures. They lose championship games, name it. Like we talked about gas prices, war in Ukraine. I mean, I could go on and on and on about why somebody would be kind of feeling down, right? But if this is an event that affects them, work, ability to take care of themselves and their relationships, and it persists longer than 2 weeks, safe to say we might want to be referring that person to get some help. They could be linked into more of that major depressive disorder area. And same thing with anxiety, public speaking, doing presentations, addressing people, having negative interactions is all anxiety provoking. But if you're not running out of the room, fleeing, crying, screaming, no-showing events, doing those things, we all know what being nervous is, right? So same thing with that depression. Everybody's going to be sad based on their life or based on the events, but is it persisting longer and causing all of those other issues? Ability to work, take care of their daily activities, relationships, so on and so on. So let's talk about how depression kind of manifests in here. And there's three ways. The most one that gets misdiagnosed is physical symptoms, okay? So a kid's telling you, oh, my stomach hurts, I'm having this and that, I have bowel movement problems, I have migraines, I have irregular menstrual cycle, whatever. And you're like, well, go to your PCP, right? Like, go to the doctor. Well, doctor runs a bunch of tests, does this and that, and they're like, hey, your labs are normal. It's like, well, it doesn't change the fact that I have this physical problem that keeps interfering with my life, right? So what do? The doctor's like, well, I don't know what to do. We can throw some pills out and do whatever, okay? If you are safe to say if somebody is having physical symptoms and they are either not being diagnosed medically, the next logical step would be, okay, this is maybe mental health, okay? Those affect. There are physical symptoms to your mental health. So physical stuff will get misdiagnosed all the time, or they'll just be a liar or over-exaggerating, whatever this, right? Then they get turned off to doctors and turned off to treatment because nobody believes me and nobody takes me seriously, so on and so on, okay? Your behavior issues are what you're gonna see every single day, right? You're gonna see kids crying, you're gonna see kids acting out, you're gonna see objects being thrown, you're gonna see the behavioral stuff. That's easy for us to get. So physical, they're gonna have to report, and there's other stuff. Behavior, we're gonna see, or teachers are gonna see. The other one is gonna be psychological, okay? And a lot of times you can see some of these, but other times you have to tease them out and ask some questions to get somebody to do that, right? If you start talking to somebody and their whole world is helpless, hopeless, and worthless, you're gonna tease that out from here because that's gonna be psychological, right? Especially when they start talking about self-criticism, self-blame, pessimism, all these ones right here. Our next questions are like, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about suicide, right? Because if I have no reason to live, and I'm telling you that my life sucks, my home life sucks, all my opportunities in life suck, it's like, whoa, that's a lot of, where's the rainbow at the end of this tunnel, right? There is none. Okay, well, what's going down, okay? So again, we have behavioral, we have physical, and we have psychological. So risk factors, okay? Everybody has distressing or uncontrollable events. You don't control the world, okay? So any of these things can be stressful or traumatic experiences. That's going to be individualized. Some people can handle a lot more than others can't, okay? But past traumatic events, secondary trauma too. Those of you who've been in law enforcement, fire, and EMS, there's a lot more emphasis on your family now. Because when you come home and you're at that heightened stage and then you drop below that and you just want to be left alone, sometimes families are affected by that too, right? So it may be secondary trauma that we're talking about. Maybe it's nothing that happened to this kid, but due to generational or due to mom and dad's experiences, they are traumatized as well. There can be that, difficult childhood, ongoing stress and anxiety, family history. How many of you guys know people who are more sensitive in nature, right? Like you see a tsunami on TV and you're like, I've never been there. I don't know those people. And there's somebody else is like, oh my God, this is terrible, right? And they just can't shake it. It really affects them to their core. You hear about it with school shootings, natural disasters. Like these people are very much affected by that. There's nothing wrong with having that empathy, but we have to watch out for those people who are more sensitive in nature because the things that roll off our back is like, whatever, it's just a part of the world that I don't know, whatever. They're like, no, this is a big deal. This hurts. This is not okay, so on and so on. So if you know anybody in these, and some of them are like the top one is the most common thing, right, versus the bottom one, okay, we know we need to watch out or perk up our spider sense a little bit more for those type of individuals. So again, illness that is life-threatening, chronic, or associated with pain, medical conditions in general, we don't talk about this one very often, right? And I wish this would have been something that we talked a little bit more when I was growing up. I had a buddy who I played grade kids football with, baseball, basketball, name it. I played sports with him all the way up. Great guy, good family, got a job at the railroad right out of high school. And during on the job, he hurt his back, okay? So like he did everything he could, physical therapy, he went here and saw this specialist, did that, even did a back surgery. Nothing changed the fact that he was in pain, right? So he got up every day in pain. It hurt to take a shower, it hurt to go here, it hurt to go there. And there's basically nothing he can do other than take pills. So he's like, all right, I'll try this out. And back in the opioid epidemic, we're still in it, but they were kind of shelling those out, right? And so he got on those and got hooked. But like a responsible adult, he was like, hey doc, be honest, I'm dependent on these things now. Like, I need them to function. I'm going all these. So what does the doctor do? And say, okay, we're going to send you to rehab. Cool. So he goes to rehab, kind of does that whole thing, comes back out. Doesn't change the fact that, hey, doc, I'm still in pain. Okay? And I need something for my back. Nope, sorry, you're an addict now. We can give you Tylenol or ibuprofen or something like that, right? Well, bad decisions after bad decisions, if your life is constantly in pain, you're going to seek out ways to not be in pain, right? So what did he do? He turned to Mexies on the street, overdosed, and died. Now that is somebody who I never would have thought about, like being in a mental health crisis. Good family, good resources, all of this stuff, but one injury, okay, affected his life to the point where he made bad decisions and could not function anymore without certain things. So we have to think about those things when we're talking about kids and other adults as well and people in your life. Is there a medical condition that is impacting their life to the point that it hurts every single day? Is this emotional pain? Is it physical pain? Whatever that is, doesn't change the fact that we overlook this all the time, okay? Because we immediately assume that we know the depressed kid of what they look like, right? Not the kid who got hurt on the field playing and now he can't play sports anymore and everything he does in his whole life has been affected now and he's going to be out for 2 years in that sport and so on. But we're like, hey, he's a good kid, he's got good parents, he's plays sports, he's fine, right? So there are other things that sometimes we're not perking up on that we should, okay? Other things, how many of you guys have seen either during childbirth, but it could be psychosis as well? How many of you guys have seen postpartum depression? Okay. Kids get pregnant in school, right? And things change then too. So sometimes when your body's flooded with a bunch of hormones and then all of a sudden it goes away, weird things happen to people. People who don't normally have thoughts about dying are thinking about jumping out the window with their kid now, right? And believe it or not, some of you know how many of you guys have had pregnant students. Okay, so it's not like a thing that's just for adults, but there's also postpartum psychosis where people who didn't have psychosis before develop psychosis after giving birth. And they're talking about strange things, doing strange things, and you're like, I don't get this, okay? So any recent life change, so that's recent childbirth in there, so on and so on. When I do this training to jail, people laugh because if you guys ever been in jail, there's no windows. Okay, there's no light in there too, okay? So access to natural light, that's why we're letting kids get out more, do those type of things, okay? Chemical neurotransmitter. The best way that a psychiatrist explained this to me when somebody talks about, I have a chemical imbalance, right? We have endorphins, we have serotonin, we have dopamine, we have all these fun things that go from one spot of those inhibitors to the other, right? And they come together kind of like a vacuum. Well, if you have a chemical imbalance, it's like you're trying to shoot a basketball and normally you swish it every single time, but now you're shooting up shots and it's bouncing off the board. It's not even getting there, air balls sometimes, right? So in those situations, their serotonin, their dopamine, whatever receptors we're talking about aren't hitting into the spots that they should. So that medication will act kind of like as a vacuum and put it in there. Or when you're bowling the bumpers, right? May take its way, but at least it's not going to gutter ball and it will get there. So when you're talking about that, that's the best way that was like, oh, okay, that makes sense on why medication is useful. But medication is just a tool. That's all. Okay, it helps with symptoms. It doesn't fix the problems. So if we are going to make that suggestion that maybe you should go see a doctor and have you thought about medication, there should be some element of therapy on that, right? Because therapy handles behaviors, it handles how you're thinking about things, it handles what you're doing about them, where medication is just numbing the symptoms. It doesn't make your world magically better, okay? So let's talk about, flip that script and talk a little bit about suicide, okay? So there is worth noticing, because I've had parents that want to come across the table about self-harm when I tell them that they're not going to die. Okay, so when we talk about the difference between suicidal thoughts, suicidal plan and intent, and non-suicidal self-injury. What is non-suicidal self-injury? What do you guys see out there? Cutting. Okay. What are the other ones that you see? Risky behavior. Yep. Okay. You may see scratches, you may see burns, you may see people pulling out their hair, right? Punching themselves, doing whatever. So non-suicidal self-injury just means that, is that it's not going to die. But that doesn't change the fact that people who care about that individual are going to be very upset about that, right? So when we are deciphering between the two, when we're talking about next level, you don't want to jump to the, oh my God, we need to call the police, we need to call an ambulance when the person's cutting on their forearm. Because why would I ever come to you with this issue again if now I have to talk to the police, get evaluated by a designated crisis responder, and take a trip to the ED when I was just trying to talk to you about my self-harming issues, right? So we have to know the difference between the two, and same with the parents as well, because a lot of time the emphasis is placed on the self-harming behavior. You need to stop cutting yourself. Well, when we're talking about these two, if that's the only thing I have as a coping skill is hurting myself, and there's a variety of reasons why somebody would do that. I feel in control. I feel released. The pain-pleasure principle. Same endorphins are released when you pull my hair than when we have fun, right? So pain-pleasure, it feels good. There's tons of reasons why somebody does that, and they're usually a coping skill, okay? But if that is my only coping skill, and it's a negative coping skill, and you remove it from me, what else do I have, okay? So when we're talking to parents or we're talking about that, the emphasis should not be on stopping that self-harm. It should be on why is the self-harming occurring? Does the person not have control of their life? Are they having feelings of being numb and that helps them? What is the thing behind the self-injury? And that's where we need to start putting that in. There are other techniques where you can replace certain things like rubbing ice, others. But that's all individualized stuff that works or doesn't work for the person. But again, we don't want to put so much emphasis and so much focus on the self-harm when there's other reasons why that person is doing that to begin with, okay? So why do I put this up here is because it is important to know the criteria where if somebody is non-suicidal self-injury, they're cutting on the forearms, you could say, well, that's a danger to self. They're hurting themselves. Well, are they danger to self, meaning they're going to end their lives? No, okay? Now, if you're cutting on your throat, or you're cutting on an artery, that's different than cutting on your thigh or your forearm, right? We can all understand that, okay? So if you're cutting on a vital area, what we're talking about doesn't exist. That is not non-suicidal self-injury. That is serious harm, okay? So when we're talking about danger to self, danger to others, there should be some type of plan, intent, and means to harm themselves or others. Otherwise, it's not rising to the level of an ITA evaluation, Involuntary Treatment Act, right? And then the other one is gravely disabled. The best way I can explain grave disability to any layman, and a lot of therapists still don't get grave disability, is if I have no better way to lose weight, right? And I think I'm just gonna fast, and I'm gonna fast for like 48 hours, right? Somebody would say, whoa, they're not eating, they're not sleeping, they're doing kind of weird stuff, that's grave disability. Well, I'm allowed to make poor choices. I could eat McDonald's every single day, right? And that's probably gravely disabled, but not to the level of you're allowed to make poor decisions. Now, if I'm refusing to eat or drink, and it's not because I have no better way to lose weight, it's because aliens have poisoned the water supply, right? Or God came down and told me that don't eat the food, don't drink the water, that's due to a mental disorder. That's due to something else, right? Then it's grave disability. So the other way to explain that too is if I'm on the roof to jump off and hurt myself, that's danger to self. If I come out there and I'm up on the roof to show you that I can fly, that's gravely disabled, okay? Because I'm putting myself in danger due to a mental disorder, not that I just make poor decisions and I'm 15 years old, right? So just a little bit of background on that. This way I like to try to explain that, but once again, it's not your job to figure that out. It's your job to observe, check that out so that you can give that information to the people who would actually be doing that, right? So it is important that you know so you can formulate a sentence that makes sense, because otherwise you're that person that calls them and be like, I need you to evaluate somebody. And you're like, why? And they're like, because they're not doing good. And you're like, well, why? And they're like, they're in crisis. What is the crisis, right? So you have to be able to speak to these things so that you can actually get somebody to come and help you. So another thing, when we talk about suicide risk, okay, that used to say sex. I changed it to gender because too many people were like, lack of sex? And it's like, well, maybe for you, but that's not what we're talking about here, okay? So gender, why is gender important when we're talking about risk of suicide? Yes.
It's one of the higher risk of kids who identify with a different gender and not being accepted.
Yeah, you nailed the most obvious one, especially nowadays, right, is misgendering somebody or not using the proper pronouns or making them feel however way based on how we're interacting with them or what terminology we're using, right? But how about, let's just say, cis individuals who non-transgendered individuals who still agree with the gender they were born with? Why is it important to know the difference between male and female?
Genetic makeup.
Okay, that could have something to do with it, but why? What about that genetic makeup?
So generally, males have a more, I guess, more violent tendencies, and as a result, you usually try to do more devastating things as far as suicide is concerned.
You nailed it. Yep. It is means, okay? So males typically use more violent means to end their life. They will shoot themselves by a firearm. They will jump from a high distance or drive their car at a high speed into something, right? So males die by suicide more, but females attempt more often than males do. Okay, and that's because their means are typically overdose, stereotypically, or cuts, or doing some form of the means is less violent to where there is some wiggle room to survive. Overdose is a terrible way. I'm not trying to tell you good ways or bad ways, but overdose is more likely to hurt your organs than it is to actually do something about in your life. And so that's why when we talk about these females will attempt more, males die by suicide more, and it is based on the means that they use. That's the only thing. Now, there are outliners, don't get me wrong. There are more effeminate males, more masculine females. Everything's on a spectrum. These are just statistics, okay? So I don't want you to get caught up and think, well, that's not gonna happen because that guy told me based on statistics. People are individuals, okay? But it is important to know based on gender because that should set up our means and intent questions, right? What about age? There are two spectrums of that, right? One is people being very old, okay? Their friends are all retiring. Their family members who once were there are having their own family members. People that they were in their peer circle with maybe are dying off, okay? What is my purpose now that I'm retired? What use do I have? So on and so on. So on the flip side of that, okay, we have that age. But on the side that we're dealing with, we have youth, okay? Everything is so much more impactful for them, right? If you would think about your life in elementary school and then think about your life in middle school, then think about your life in high school, then think about your life in college, were they the same all the way through? Did the same stressors that you had and the things that were a big deal to you have, right? That's called hindsight, right? Kids don't have that. Okay, my world now is going to be my world forever. I will never find another significant other. As if they're not a swipe away on whatever dating app, right? Or down the road, okay? Now, you can't tell them that because you're telling me you're not validating their experience, right? They're just one step away. Maybe you're giving weird advice, too, to some kid. But it doesn't change the fact that that breakup, okay, was really impactful for them, okay? That humiliation that they suffered on Facebook is going to stick with them their entire life, right? So things are so much more globalized or so much more kind of extravagized. I just made up a word, extravagized, than it would be for an adult, right? So you have to think that in consideration. Like I said, resist that urge to do that quick fix Dr. Phil thing, okay? So again, age is going to matter, especially for the population that we're working with. We talked about chronic pain, alcohol use, okay? But these are huge indicators. Why would previous attempt and organized plan matter in your questioning? How did you get here today? Did you put some form of a plan together? Okay? How did you get to this point in your career? Did you stumble into a door and somebody hired you? Right? You may have. This guy's shaking his head, yes, that's how I've got all my jobs. I stumbled in there. Well, good for you. See, outliners. But usually doing anything requires a plan, okay? It requires some thought out, step-by-step method to get what it is that you want to get, okay? So, previous attempt would tell you that they've already tried this before, okay? And just like anything, the more you try it, the easier stuff becomes, okay? You also figured out what to do and what not to do. So you better be asking about previous attempt in there because that indicates something or not, okay? The other one is organized plan. If they've put enough time to think about how they would do it, when they would do it, and what means to use, there's other things too. Because if I start telling somebody and asking, have you thought about how you would kill yourself? And they say, yeah, I'd shoot myself, okay? The next question is, do you have a gun? And if the answer is, yes, I do, the next question better be, where's it at? Because if it's on you right now, we got a bigger issue here for everybody, right? So now, oh, it's at home, it's locked up. Okay, we can switch those gears off and focus on the next step, okay? But we're not going to get there if you just stop the questioning on, are you having suicidal thoughts? Okay? So we need to follow that up with, is there intent there? Because I could just be telling you that my life sucks and I think about it, I don't want to do it, and I have protective factors. I have faith, I have relatives, I have animals, I have whatever thing that keeps me safe, right? So, but that's why we want to let that up with plan, intent, and means, okay? Because they matter. Any questions so far on that? Okay. So, warning signs. Some of these are very obvious, right? Giving away objects, making statements, just, hey, I wish this would happen, or I'm going to do this, or whatever kind of threat that they make there, okay? You hit on one of reckless behavior, okay? So are they engaging in risk-taking or reckless behavior? So some of these we get, okay? Having a dramatic change in mood, though, I want to bring your attention to this one because it goes both ways, okay? Usually when somebody's doing well and we see them and they are well, and then all of a sudden they're sad or they're depressed, or we get that. That makes sense to us. They used to behave this way, now they're behaving this way. Light bulb goes on, something's wrong. Okay, but the opposite is true. Okay, if I was not doing well and you're used to that and we've talked about it and we've had discussions and all of a sudden I show up and I'm ecstatic and I'm looking good, I got all my stuff and I'm ready, and you're like, wow, whatever referral we gave that person or whatever strategy is working. Well, the opposite true is true where, hey, I'm at peace with my decision. I've been struggling with this the whole time, okay? And now I got all my ducks in order, I got everything I needed to accomplish, and I'm okay with my decision. So sometimes you'll see that where people are like, I had no idea, especially on the presentation. It's like, well, in hindsight, later on, you talk to these people, they're like, no, the signs were there. It's all there. So any dramatic change in mood, from positive to negative to positive, that's something worth exploring or at least looking into, okay? So there are questions to ask here, okay? When we're talking about how many are uncomfortable, it's a normal thing, especially when I worked in this field and I first started, I was extremely uncomfortable talking about suicide or even asking questions on suicide. Is there anybody that is willing to admit it but is uncomfortable with that topic area? It's hard. It's not an easy topic area, right? And what do you say? Heaven forbid they say yes, then what do you do? Oh my God, right? What do we do? So the best way to talk and ask the question is to be as blunt as possible, okay? You don't want to kind of sugarcoat it and, are you thinking about doing something that you'll regret? You wouldn't hurt yourself, would you, in leading those questions? The best way we can ask it is, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? The more direct and the more blunt you can ask that question, okay, the better. You don't want to, like we talked about having open-ended questions, there are some times where we want to close these. Are you going to kill yourself, right? That is something that I'm like, okay, that's a good closed-ended question because that is right to the point. We need to know that answer, okay? So the most blunt you can ask is the better. If they do say yes, though, okay, we need to follow it up with some of these questions. Have you decided how you're going to kill yourself, okay? Are you going to overdose? Are you going to jump off something big? Do we need to lock up sharps and medications and firearms? Have you thought about how you're going to, okay? When have you decided, or did you decide when you would do it? That is important too, because I remember assessing people in jail and they would say, well, if I don't get custody of my kids, I'll do that. Well, my next question is, when is your custody hearing? Okay? Because if they're only saying if these things happen, if my parents get divorced, if I don't pass my class, if we don't win the championship, then I will, okay? Well, that follows up with, is there any other way? Nothing else in there? Okay, well then we need to pay attention to these dates on when these things will actually occur, okay? Had one guy in jail say, well, I'm gonna jump out in front of traffic when I in here, and I'm like, there's no cars through here, through jail. So not to make light of it, we're not going to jump to there's no other reason. No, just okay. We need to perk up and wait till he gets released. Okay, then we'll deal with that, because right now there's no other things in there. So when and how is another one. And have you started collecting things? Okay, if somebody's taking medication and they skip doses every other day and they've been collecting that, or they cheek it, or they've been collecting sharps, name it, right? Collecting ammo, collecting firearms, whatever that may be, have they started getting that stuff to carry that out? Okay. So really, it's going to be uncomfortable. I don't expect any of you guys to be like, oh yeah, it's an easy topic that I talk about, no problem. It's hard and it's not a good topic to be talking about, right? But if we are, and we need to have those conversations, blunt and followed up with intent, plan, and means. Those are 3 things that we need to hit on every single time. So how do we talk to somebody who's suicidal, okay? For one, we want to let the person know that we're here to help, okay? You guys just have I got on the end with the hope one, but I like to think about this as hope with facts, okay? You're not going to tell the person that go to counseling and you'll have no problem. I'll refer you here and problem will be solved. You don't know that, right? So you can still say things. There are people who struggle with it. They go here and it can be beneficial. Here are the places to go. So we want to still instill some hope with some facts, but we never tell the person you're going to be A-okay, go here and problem solved. We don't speak with things that we don't know the result of that, right? So again, we can let them know that we're concerned about them and why, okay? Because some people may just be walking through oblivious in the cloud, not understanding what they were doing. Oh, I didn't realize that I was doing that, okay? So it's always helpful to state what the observation you're seeing and what you're willing to do with that, okay? Try to ask the question. I've seen so many people, oh, are you suicidal again? Right? And they're like, whoa, don't do that. Don't roll your eyes. Don't do any of that, right? Try your hardest, even if it is gamey, okay? I don't care, because there are people, when I say gamey, there was a lot of individuals who would attempt, but their attempt would already have, they would know that they would be found, right? Or that somebody would be there at a certain time. So people would feel like, oh, well, they're not serious. No. It doesn't matter if you think it's gamey or you think the one time that that person doesn't show up when they were supposed to show up, or the one time that they cut too deep, or the one time they take too much, okay? So even if it is gamey, and even if it is always going on and they're always saying that, we still take it seriously and we don't express it with any negative judgment, okay? Again, we're going to give reassurance and information. People do get better from this. People struggle with this. Sometimes people need to know that it's common. A lot of people have that, right? Okay. Now, whether you choose to disclose, hopefully it's appropriate disclosure. I don't recommend disclosure, okay, unless you're in kind of a therapeutic environment or you have a relationship with the person that you feel comfortable doing that. But letting them know that they're not the only one who's felt like this, and that there are other people and there are ways of dealing with this or helping with this goes a long way, okay? And then the other 2 risk factors that we want to look at are going to be, are they actively using alcohol and drugs, or are there alcohol and drugs in the home? Okay? So that's something that we want to know. The other one, like we talked about, has he or she made a suicide attempt in the past? Okay? Because believe it or not, people still learn what not to do or who not to talk to next time because of how that got set up. So again, past experience is going to matter. So what isn't supportive? Okay? Think about you being pissed off and upset, okay? Life's not going the way, those unmet expectations, okay? And somebody tells you, just looks at you and says, calm down, be reasonable, snap out of it. Has that ever worked? How many times have you said that to your significant other? Has it ever worked? You tell me to calm down, I'm flipping a table. Don't tell me to calm down, right? Happens all the time. So please, when we're talking about what isn't supportive, which is sometimes more important than what is supportive, okay? Don't tell people to calm down, snap out of it, grow up, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, nut up, whatever we say. Let's just say the quick fix stuff we'll leave alone. We don't want to do it in a sarcastic or hostile way. And we definitely don't want to threaten people, okay? You don't want to threaten somebody with sports. You don't want to threaten somebody with school or graduation. You don't want to threaten, I'll tell your parents. We don't make those. We tell them what is the next step, okay? It's not a threat. You don't say, do this or I'll do that. You say, we're going to do this because of these reasons, okay? So they're definitely not threats. We don't trivialize the other one is true too. How many guys have had coworkers who adopt an overprotective kind of mode, or a certain individual that pulls on their heartstrings that they become overly involved in or want to cure? Have that happened to you guys before? Most people are shaking their head yes. Okay. So remember that. You are human. We all have experiences. There are people who right away we dislike for whatever reason, and there are people who we like and the stories get to us and we take an investment in. Okay, that is fine. You can still take investment in people or want to help them, but please don't be that one person who is overly involved or crosses boundaries or tries to cure the person or goes above and beyond. I'm not telling you to not help people, but what I'm telling you is if you're doing stuff that make all of us else look like we don't care, and you're the only one that does because you're the one that goes above and beyond, that's more detrimental to all of us, because then nobody can help that person but this individual, because this individual is the one that cares. The rest of you guys, you're just here to do a job, right? But this person understands me. That has some negative side effects to that, trust me. It doesn't end well for the person who does it either, okay? So we want to resist that urge to cure anybody or get overly involved in their treatment. So how do we keep somebody safe? Okay, one of the easiest things to do is identify protective factors, because everybody has been alive up until this point, right? So what do we do? Okay, is it that you go to church, like we talked about? Is it that you have sports? Do you have animals? Do you have responsibilities? Do a younger sibling need you? Like, what is that person's, what has kept them alive to this point? Okay, identify those things. Use those things, okay? As protective factors, we want to enable somebody to use the things that they've already been using, because everybody has some coping skills that are positive, okay? The other one is that we want to include them in the decision making. Now, this is artistic, and I do this with kids all the time, okay? Hey, we can either go talk to the school counselor, or I can call the police, or I can call a designated crisis responder. Which one do you think we should do? Now, what I didn't do was give them, hey, we can sit here and do nothing, okay? Or I'll just let you go home, okay? What I didn't do is give them that option. So even though I included them in the decision-making process, they're more likely to make a good decision when they have the choice in it versus what we tell them what to do, or we tell them it's open-ended, feel free to pick one, okay? So again, keep those. Offer practical help, real things, okay? Sometimes people say a lot of crazy stuff like, well, have you tried yoga? It's like, we're in the middle of class, man. Like, what is he gonna do yoga from? That's not helpful. Like, maybe some deep breaths, maybe that would be more applicable to this situation, okay? The one thing that we don't want to do is actively leave somebody who is voicing these alone, okay? So if somebody's telling you, yes, I'm struggling with these thoughts, yes, I have plans, yes, I have intent, don't be like, hang here, I'm gonna go get some other people, okay? We don't actively leave people who are suicidal alone, okay? That's not what we're gonna do. Again, do not leave the actively or with guilt. I used to think that when I was real young, when I was younger, I thought I was so much smarter. Now I'm like, I don't know anything, you know? But when I was young, I would say things like that to people. Do you know that statistically your children are far more likely to attempt or die by suicide if you are suicidal? That's not helpful. Telling that person that they're affecting their children when they already feel like they're in hell, or telling them you could go to hell for that, those things aren't helpful at all, okay? So if somebody's already in a state of mind that they're not thinking properly, or they're thinking all these other things, and you add on to it by saying, hey, it's kind of a crappy parenthood, right? Or you don't want to affect your younger siblings, it's not going to be helpful to them, okay? And the other thing that's super weird is agreeing to keep any student's plans secret, okay? Don't do that ever in anybody's life, okay? Even if I care about somebody, if we're talking about their safety level, confidentiality or our friendship or whatever, that loyalty goes out the window if I'm gonna keep that person safe. All right, the other thing that we can do when we talk about hope with facts is letting them know who they can actually go to and what they do, okay? So we talked about primary care physicians are typically that first line of defense. Has a kid even seen a primary care physician, right? I know kids that have never gone to the dentist, let alone have a primary care physician, or, you know, and you're like, wow, maybe we should start there, right? So are they actively going to their PCP, or do they need a referral? Psychiatrists are medical doctors, but they have more focus on psychiatric medication and do a little bit more mental health rotation than what a normal MD would do. the issue with psychiatrists, the pros is that they have that specialty. They have that inside knowledge. Problem is the likelihood of getting a kid in to see one ASAP is highly unlikely. I don't know how Yakima's wait is, but we're looking at like 30 days at best for waiting in the Tri-Cities, right? So there is no shortage of people needing help, but there is a shortage of people qualified to help. So psychiatrists have that, but maybe we need to look at a different option and one that's more available. So the other one that's not on there is a ARNP, a psychiatric nurse practitioner. They can do the same thing that a psychiatrist can. They don't need anybody to sign off, but they're a nurse. They're not a doctor, right? And some people feel more comfortable talking to nurses. They spend more time. They don't have a God complex that we always shoot, at doctors, or whatever negative connotation somebody may have as a doctor. Maybe they feel more comfortable talking to a nurse, okay? The other one are going to be your social workers, whether you have those in your schools, the counselors in your school, okay, or private practicing, other type of mental health professionals. One thing, how many of you guys know what a certified peer specialist is? Okay, that is on the rise. Peer specialists are individuals with lived life experience. And I hear all the time when somebody meets with a peer that, wow, that was the first time that somebody's talked with me versus talk at me, right? They're individuals who have been in the system. So either kids who have been through that, had rough childhoods, learned from that, and they can relate to a kid who's going through something on a different level than what an adult who's never experienced that can, right? Or another kid who doesn't have that same experience. And so there's peers in every element now, whether it's substance use disorders, whether it's criminal, whether it's mental health, there's peers in all that kind of stuff. And then so the other types of professions we're talking about are talk therapies and medication. When we talk statistically, the best combination for that is that you are lowering those symptoms with medication and you're working through the problems with thinking, behaving errors, and all those other type of stuff in conjunction. Both work, right? But so does prayer, so does positive thinking, so does motivational interviewing, like so on and so on. If you believe something to work, it is more beneficial to work. But when we're talking about statistic results, the two in combination are the highest. And then there are other professional supports too, right? We have acupuncture, you have massage therapy, you have all different types of stuff coming out. I don't recommend any kids doing ketamine, but ketamine is now you're able to do that IV or nasal, and that's for treatment-resistant depression. So there are other stuff that I would tell you can't send kids to and don't. But there are other professional supports, microdosing, psilocybin, so mushrooms in Oregon is where you can do that. You can't do that here. But there are a bunch of other stuff that's kind of on the rise that's coming through that's getting more mainstream that as we talk about the years come through may become a little bit normalized. But, so let's talk about some mood disorders. Bipolar disorder is one of those things where it can be both. It can be a mood disorder with depression and anxiety because it has that element. But it can also be a psychotic disorder, like with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. So mania is hard to diagnose in kids because they're all manic. All of them. They're all hyperactive. They all have grandiose thoughts. They all have elated moods, right? So this is why we try not to diagnose youth until they're 18, okay? But so when we're talking about mania, okay, the one that gets people in trouble a lot is going to be right here, the lack of inhibitions and the grandiose and delusional stuff, okay? Again, they lack a lot of insight into their behaviors, but these are adults who are jumping on police cars and elbow dropping them and doing a bunch of stuff because they thought it was going to be funny to do, right? And you're like, what? Why would you ever do that? And you're like, well, it's fun to do, okay? I had a buddy who had this really expensive necklace that he really liked, right? And he was in a manic episode. We were younger at the time, so we kind of were aware, but not really aware. And this girl just started talking to him, and we didn't know who she was. She was at a party. He gave her his necklace. Then he started upping the ante, and the whole night turned into just this terrible, which, like I said, he was the one that jumped on the police car towards the end. And we always wondered, why was he behaving that way? Well, he was bipolar. He's undiagnosed this whole time, flying under the radar, and had a manic episode, okay? So these are the people who may be becoming religiously preoccupied. They're now a prophet. They're on a mission. They have this. God talks to them, right? Or some people will get very sexually inappropriate, and so they'll feel like they can say and do things and act out in certain ways that they wouldn't have acted like that when they were kind of more in a stable environment. So Anybody who's kind of showing signs of these, it may be something that we want to get looked at. But like I said, diagnosing youth is a little bit harder than it would be adults. So there are other types of disorders which psychosis occurs. So schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, psychotic depression usually happens after people lack of sleep, lack of eating. Then they become like, those of you in the military, you know what sleep deprivation does to people. Eventually you'll start hallucinating, right? So schizoaffective disorder is a combination of having bipolar disorder symptoms and schizophrenia. It's terrible. It's like probably winning the lottery of mental illness on the opposite side, because you have both of those. So, and then we have drug-induced psychosis, right? So if somebody does enough drugs, does enough damage to their brain, it's really hard to fix your brain, where some of your organs heal itself, your brain doesn't, right? So again, you can't have drug-induced psychosis. So if you are seeing individuals in school with talking to themselves, hearing voices, seeing things, okay? This is not you talking to yourself. This is I'm talking to something or someone else, okay? We need to get that person looked at immediately, okay? Because there could be, we talk about early prevention, okay? When you have a manic episode or you have a psychotic break, it is the equivalent of doing damage to your brain, okay? So if we do not intervene at that first one or first couple of times, you may deal with some damage that cannot be reversed. And you see that through people, if you've ever worked in like clinics, or you can see the progression of when they first came in as teenagers versus how they are now as adults, because they didn't take care of themselves and had multiple breaks. It's like doing brain damage every single time. So if we can intervene before that ever happens, there's going to be less criminal activity in the future, less high-risk behavior. We can, literally save somebody's life, so on and so on. So if you see any of those, they require immediate assistance. So what is psychosis? You guys know, for the most part, what is psygnosis. They've lost contact with reality. Okay, there's some disturbances in their thinking or their emotional behavior. Can be and can co-occur with depression and anxiety, especially, like I said, if you're so depressed that you're not eating and you haven't slept in 3 days, you may start developing some psychosis, okay? And here's how we can think about it. People that, malingering is a fancy word for saying you're making it up, right? When somebody gets a malingering diagnosis, that means they've gone through a bunch of different tests and a bunch of different things, and they can say, okay, it's not, what they're reporting isn't accurately showing up with what's going on. And one of those things that happens when people say that is that they can feel like they can turn hallucinations on and off. You can't. When you're psychotic, it's there constantly, but there's peaks of it where it's really, really bad and unbearable, and there are times where you can still function. But it doesn't mean there are periods where you don't have it, right? So if somebody's living with schizophrenia, it's quite possible that they're hearing voices constantly, but the level of the voices and the intensity of those hallucinations, right, is what matters in that. And so it usually occurs in episodes. It's not constant. And what I mean by not constant, like I said, it's still there. It's just not overly impactful. It happens in episodes of intensity, okay? So how do we talk to somebody who is in that? We have to give very clear, concise directions, okay? If talking to you and I hear like somebody's talking to me in an earpiece, I hear a TV, a radio in the background, and I hear weird, strange noises, and you're talking to me, good luck on tracking that, right? It's probably hard enough to do that when you're on the iPad TV and your kid's talking to you, okay? So if that is going on, we give one direction at a time. I need you to get up and come with me. Okay? Until they respond with that, I need you to get up and come with me. We don't say, I need you to get up and come with me. I'm going to walk you down to the office. We're going to talk to so-and-so. I also called your mom, and that's way too much information. Okay? One thing at a time. They comply with that, then we get on to the next comply. Okay? You can see it all the time in jail when somebody's naked. They're like, put your clothes on. You got hearing. We got to get to this and that. And it's like, no. Wait till they put their clothes on. Let them put their clothes on, then we'll give the next direction, right? Okay, so we also show our hands. Okay, when people are, officers are like this regardless because they have to be because they're safety. But the flip side of that too is that most people who have an abusive history, right, or they're paranoid in nature, what are you doing with your hands? So that's why I'm going to say show your hands when we're talking to somebody. If I've been raised in an abusive environment and dad, when he came home, depending on his posture, his tone, what he was doing signified whether I was safe or not, I become hyper vigilant to my environment. I become more sensitive to what you're doing with your hands in your pocket and what you have in there. So if I'm actively hearing voices and that's going on and I'm paranoid on top of my trauma history, I'm probably going to be more concerned with what you're doing and how you're doing it than the words you're using. So that's why we show our hands and talk slowly and clearly. Okay? Once again, the one thing that you don't do, and it can be effective, don't get me wrong, I've seen people be like, the aliens are after me, and they're like, yeah, you are, quick, you're safe in your cell, and then they get in their cell. Okay, we agreed. What did we just do? We agreed with their delusions and their hallucinations, okay? You do not do that. We don't agree, and we also do not disagree, okay? Because what you'll do to somebody is either one, you're in on it, me and this guy get it, dude, he hears me, the rest of you guys are all in on the conspiracy. But then later on, when you don't follow up with everything that I think, now I think you're full of it and you're a liar, and now me and you have a different problem, right? But also, like I said, agreeing with it, you don't do that. It's safe to say the easiest thing is, I believe that you're experiencing that. Well, do you see him too? I don't see him. Do you hear him? I don't, but I believe that you're experiencing that, right? So we don't disagree, we don't give into that. And again, we don't do multiple directions at once. Cutting down on time, so recap here, we talked about how to recognize anxiety and emotional confrontation and using your supportive comments, using supportive observations. We also talked about emotional confrontation being a testing stage, right? You're not in any real danger for that. The person is kind of looking to see how you respond, looking what's next. Talked about mental conditioning. What are you doing to make sure that you're playing through scenarios in your head, whether those are very high probability and happen all the time versus very low probability and happen very rarely, but it doesn't change the fact that it could happen, right? We also talked about your expectations, talked about past experiences, okay? Keeping those in checks, but also understanding what is the student's expectation. Nonverbal communications, personal space being the comfortability, reactionary distance, how much I have to time to defend myself if need be. Talked about different causes, so on and so on. Safe language, steps for suicide, and then psychosis and drug use. So that 2 hours flew by. So it leaves us a little bit of time for questions, comments, and concerns. Oh, quiet. You guys had more questions for the HIPAA stuff.
You just covered it all, Cameron. That's it. You're too good. You should.
Did you say you don't understand that, or you do? Yeah. That's why you had more questions. Like, I don't know what this is. What is it? Yeah. You're going to let me off the hook easy. This is all right.
If you had one piece of advice to send us all out of here with, what would it be?
I would say make sure that you're doing well, okay? Check yourself first. Check yourself at the mirror. Check yourself on the way out. Always try to be as self-aware as you can be. If you're feeling a certain way, identify that. If you're not feeling well, what is that and what can you do about it, right? So first and foremost, you cannot help anyone unless you're able to help yourself, okay? So take care of yourself, use positive coping skills, be realistic with how you're feeling and what to do about it. But that's what I would tell you. You're not gonna be able to help any kids or even your family members or yourself if you can't take care of what is first and foremost.
And not to make light of that comment, but the whole thing about your zipper really drives that point home. So appreciate that.
It's there this time.
All right, that's awesome advice. Others, thoughts, questions?
What do you see like behavioral mental health and you guys associating as far as law enforcement? We're seeing a greater need for you guys. Do you guys branching out, hiring more professionals? Because we are definitely seeing the need for more and more. It seems like every day.
Yeah, we just did a community health improvement plan and a community needs assessment, and that's in the entire area. And everybody has a very similar thing. The state has been putting more and more emphasis on it, more and more money available, but it doesn't change the fact that the workforce isn't there, right? So how do you attract the people to do it? One way that they are doing it is opening positions up to peer positions, which are high school diploma, GED, not degree required, but more live life experience, which arguably can be more valuable than a book, right? But so limiting some of the requirements, they're talking to the state about limiting some of the what they can report on and what they can bill for, so that you can actually get people in there, laxing on some of the supervision requirements to get that workforce in there. So can we expand it? And also having a little bit more diversion options, because as a law enforcement officer, I'm sure the 20-80 rule applies, or the 80-20 it's more known as, where typically 20% of the population commits 80% of the crimes, uses 80% of the resources, uses 80% of your time, so on and so on. So how can we identify that population and get them a diversion to where we're not just incarcerating, getting out, putting in the psych hospital, getting treated, stabilized, and coming out? Like, is there wraparound services that we can have for them? And that's the other thing, is what diversion services do we have for those high utilizers that we can keep them out of law enforcement, keep them from committing crimes, keep them out of the EDs, all those other kind of, where I always think about, I've been to the ED twice in my life, and there have been people who have been to the ED 75 times in a month. You know what I mean? And so it's like one of those things where we're missing something in there, that is a gap in there that we could have somebody, a case manager, a peer, somebody follow up with, what is the need that's not being met here, right? Because going to a clinic isn't going to take care of that, you know. Having law enforcement or EMS or fire respond to that isn't going to take care of that. So what are the other services that we're looking at? So these conversations are happening, and change does take time, but getting the workforce developed and having a more robust kind of eclectic system is where the answer to that would be.
Thanks, Lupe.
What
Oh.
percentage, as far as drug abuse, psychosis, things like that, are you guys seeing as opposed to legitimate mental health, things that they're dealing with at night?
The question is, what percentage of drug substance abuse do you see?
So you, on that slide when we talked about all of the diagnosis, schizophrenia is the most one that's talked about in the news and kind of like violent and this and that, right? But it's a very small population. It's actually really rare to be diagnosed organically with that. Most of that is because it was drug induced, right? And so usually when I'm doing an evaluation, it's been a few years since I've been on direct care, but I would read the labs first and foremost, what's on there. And it was very rare that there wasn't something on the lab, right? Even if it was just marijuana, you can't test for mushrooms and some other drugs. But yeah, the co-occurring is, that's why we removed, are they mental health or are they substance use disorder? They co-occur. There's no chicken or the egg in that. And so I would say majority of all of them have something on their labs. So 100%.
All right. Well,
Cool.
Cameron, thank you, my friend. Yay! Really appreciate it. All right. Fabulous. Thank you. Yeah.